Hi, and welcome to Family Recipe. My name's Anne, and today we're making another York Fair favorite, chicken corn soup. So when you're thinking about fair food, soup probably doesn't come to mind at first. But in York County, there's a very rich Pennsylvania Dutch tradition in the food and the culture because lots of Amish and Mennonite people live in and around York County. So when you go to the fair, you're gonna see whoopie pies, shoe fly pie, and chicken corn chowder. So we're gonna make some of that today. In my stock pot, I have almost 5 pounds of bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs. Chicken thighs are awesome to cook with. The meat is so moist and tender, and they're very forgiving. You really can't overcook a chicken thigh, which is great. So I put them in the pot and I covered them by about 1 inch with cold water, and now that's coming up to a boil. So to this broth that we're making, I'm gonna add 1 whole onion that I peeled and cut in half, just for a little extra flavor. And then I have some seasonings here too. It's about 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of ground pepper, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg for an interesting background flavor, and then a bay leaf. So we'll add the seasonings in. You can also add some celery into your stock for a little extra flavor, but fun fact, I really don't like celery. In fact, I haven't bought it probably in at least 10 years, and the only reason I bought it back in college was because I heard that you expend more calories digesting it than are actually in celery, and I just ended up covering mine in peanut butter and raisins anyway, so that wasn't worth it. So no more celery for me, but if you want to add it in, go for it. I put the lid on my stock pot and the soup is over high heat, so I'm going to bring it up to a boil and then reduce it to a simmer and let it cook for a good 2 hours. I know it takes a long time to make, but the ingredients and the steps are so easy. The end result is absolutely worth it. It's a good meal to make on a lazy Sunday afternoon, if somebody in your family is sick, or even on a rainy weekday if you have a little extra time to cook. The soup simmered for a good 2 hours, so I turned off the heat and I'm gonna remove the chicken thighs so that they can cool. That way I can handle them and pull the meat off the bones. If you aren't eating this that day, what you can do with the stock that you've made is put it in the fridge to cool, and that way all the fat will solidify on top, and then you can scrape that off and use the broth the next day. I'm just gonna serve mine for dinner tonight, but then I'll do that process with the leftovers, which there will be a lot of, which is great, over the course of the week. After I remove the chicken, I also use my kitchen spider to strain out the onions and the bay leaf so we have a nice smooth broth. The only thing left to add to our chicken corn soup is the corn. So I have 5 ears of fresh corn here, but you could definitely sub in a bag of frozen corn or even a couple of cans of corn. I started to cut the kernels of corn off of the cob and they flew everywhere. And then I remembered a hack that I saw online for cutting corn off the cob. So I grabbed my bundt pan and we're gonna try this again. So I'm standing up my ear of corn right in the middle, taking my sharp serrated knife, and we're just gonna cut down, getting all the kernels as close to the cob as possible. And that really works. It catches all of the little kernels of corn. They're not flying all over my kitchen this time. All right, so I'm gonna do this to all 5 ears of corn and then we'll add them into the broth. The chicken is cooled to the point where I can handle it. So I took all the skin off and now I'm just going to remove the meat from the bones. And you can see it is so tender, it just falls apart. So we'll do that and then we'll add this and the corn back into the broth. The chicken and corn are ready to be added into our soup. Now, I had turned the heat off, so as soon as I was done with the whole process of pulling the chicken and cutting the corn, I just turned it back on, and it only took a couple minutes for the liquid to come back to a simmer. If you want to just keep the heat on, keep simmering your broth, make sure you put a lid on. That way you won't lose a lot through evaporation. So let's add this all in. I'm going to simmer the chicken and corn in the broth for another 10 or 15 minutes to cook the corn. The last thing I want to add though is a little more salt. I tasted my broth and it definitely needs some more. So we're going to start with an additional teaspoon or so. I'll let that cook for those 10 to 15 minutes and then I'll test it again before I serve it to see if it needs any more seasoning. My soup simmered for another 10 or 15 minutes. The corn is cooked through and everything's combined. I tasted it one more time and I added an additional teaspoon of salt. You can salt this to taste, so if you want a little bit more, go for it. I also added a tablespoon of dried parsley just for a little bit of color at the end. So now we're going to serve this up. I'm going to give this chicken corn soup a taste. It's so simple, but so flavorful. It takes me right back to the York Fair. The stand where you can get this is called Stoltzfus, and it's right under the grandstands at the fairgrounds. So we would always go and get a big bowl of chicken corn soup and a ham and cheese sandwich. So they had ham and Swiss cheese sliced paper thin on a pillowy soft potato roll, and you could add classic yellow mustard to it. That, with the soup and a tall glass of orangeade, recipe link below, would be my ultimate perfect fair meal. Thanks for joining me on Anne's Family Recipe, and I'll see you again soon. For the full recipe, check the description box below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for joining me in my kitchen.